Hey folks, Kevin here. Today I wanted to take a couple of minutes and talk about the permanent raised beds that we've transitioned to over the last couple of years. Since I've learned about Eliot Coleman and Jean-Martin Fortier, the market gardener, both of these individuals have really influenced the way that we, create our garden beds and how we manage the beds. And I won't go into occultation and stale seed bedding, all of those things. However, a lot of what they're doing is they're using BCS tractors, which are an Italian-made two-wheel walk-behind tractor that takes multiple implements, and one of which is a rotary tiller-like machine that goes behind the BCS tractor. And what it can do is you can create raised beds by going down an area that has decent soil, tilling up a pathway and making a raised area. Then adding a weed mat on top of, and once you prep the bed appropriately, putting a weed mat on the bed really helps to suppress the germination and development of the weeds. And those nutrients can go into the plants, the crop that you're trying to manage, and less nutrients going to the weeds. And we all hate doing weeding, and this has really worked out extremely well. Now, I won't go into great details on this whole technique. There's lots of information on YouTube available, and certainly the Market Gardener has written a nice book, a nice reference. And if you just look up Eliot Coleman, Jean-Martin Fortier, and even Curtis, I can't think Curtis's last name now, the Urban Farmer, and he has a book out. I haven't looked at his book yet, but I'm sure it's good. His YouTube videos are excellent. So these permanent raised beds, most folks will go ahead and take an area that was lawn or field and be able to go in and turn their soil into a decent garden raised bed. We basically live on a property that's gravel bed. My next door neighbor is a big gravel bed, and so it's just very difficult to work with. So I do lots of composting, lots of soil creation, and someday I'll make a video on the several methods we use to create soil here and capture soil that's already been made and just ends up in canalways. So I'll go over that in a future video. But for right now, I thought I'd show you how we actually create these beds. Now this is a bed behind me that we created this at the end of last season and the beginning of this season. And it probably looks like many permanent raised beds in a sense. Now, we use the wood chips in between, but one of the things that I'd say, if I have the time, so below these wood chips are leaves that I collected the fall before. Just trying to see if I'm in the shot. So leaves that I collected the fall before, and other materials, even weeds material. Everything goes into the big crevice in between, and the wood chips end up going on the top. The leaves, when I started collecting leaves and putting them in between our raised beds, it created a great environment for the chickens to come in at the end of the season, and they were going for all the worms and all the other invertebrates that they could consume. And that was just enriching the beds. And I use those leaves for our potatoes when I'm hilling up the potatoes, and I use them for all around the food forest as well. So old hay that somebody's getting rid of, that they have the pads, they go below the wood chips and all. but how do we actually create these beds? Because I actually have this is just over a foot high right now, but it starts off as 2 foot high. And I'll show you, since I'm in the middle of creating one of our last beds over here. And I don't know if this is all going to show up. I'll turn this. So I wish now you can't see the dang bed. Jeez. All right. So to give you a little bit of scale, when I make these beds, they end up being 36 inches wide, and they're 2 feet tall. And right now, all I have are wood chips that are coming in. Now, fortunately, this time of year, there's lots and lots of green leafy material as well on it. So here we have, they've gotten some honey locusts yesterday when it came in, and I'd already created the compost, so I'm just getting ready to put it in. I just wait for the wood chips to come in. I build the barrier in between, which would be the walkways, and then we set down our soaker hose, and I'm not sure how we're going to be doing irrigation in the future, but right now I'm using soaker hose underneath the weed mats. We burn our holes for each plant depending on the spacing and the number of rows for each system. Or for like carrots and all, it won't have a weed mat, or our onions or our leeks. So I just wanted to show you, and I'm going to grab a bucket for a second. So this is a 5-gallon bucket, and I collect quite a few buckets, and one of the things I drilled numerous 5/16 inch holes all around these buckets. And I bury these, last year and the year before, I'd bury these within the permanent raised beds, not in the walkways, right in the beds. And I would bury these up to this top rim. You can actually see where the dirt was. And what our plan was to go ahead and take all of the leaves that weren't looking good, any weeds, anything, put them in here. And I took some of our vermicompost, our red wiggler worms, put them in here with some coffee grounds as well, and feed them throughout the season. Now the soil in here was great. All of the stuff was broken down. I think many of the earthworms took a lot of that material out into the bed, and it really did help a lot. And I had 1 to 2 of these in each one of the beds. You know, like if it was a 70 or 80 foot bed, I'd have 2 of these in that row. Problem was, the reason I'm no longer doing this in the raised beds is because I just didn't have the time to go and collect all the material and get them into these buckets. So, especially as the foliage and the plants got quite large, well, it's harder than heck to even get to these buckets. So I stopped doing that. But one thing I did learn when I build these beds, if I build them 2 feet tall as I'm doing now, they end up being about 1 foot in depth the next season. So there's a lot of compression or compaction that happens, and we're really careful. The reason that we have these walkways in between these beds is we want to step on these beds as minimally as possible. The one time that I am stepping on the beds is when I'm using the broad fork. So that's it with that. If you have any questions or comments, please feel free. I just wanted to show what the bed would look like, and yes, there is some compression or compaction. Dang it. Yes, there is some consolidation of these beds over time, But when I put the broad fork in them in the springtime when I'm prepping these beds, it's so nice not to have all that stone in there. I can just lightly aerate it without destroying all the soil structure. Then I go through it with the BCS rotary harrow that really just tills that first 3/4 to 1.5 inches and creates a beautiful seed bed to go ahead and plant on. So the first season it's not ideal because it's just so soft and there's still organic material that hasn't completely broken down. There aren't the pathogens in it, there aren't the weed seeds because I got it to the right temperature when I was composting material. That material that goes in the rows, I'll mention, like all the leaves and the wood chips, there's going to be weed seeds in that. And when I do use that other implement that turns that path up onto the to the bed, there's going to be weed seeds. So we'll flame weed, or we use tarps to help kill off some of those seeds as they're germinating. And we do the things we can to mitigate weed development in the gardens because that takes time and that's one precious commodity we just don't have enough of. So I hope this helps out some with seeing how we're actually creating our beds. This bed behind me here is Zone 1B. The one I showed you first is Zone 1C, and we've done the same thing on Zone 1D. E next year, F and G the year after. Thanks for watching, folks. Have a great day. Bye-bye now.